This happened to me while I was camping with my boyfriend. There was this spot we frequented every time we went, and we would go every year near the start of the spring, just when things started getting warmer. We did the usual, like set up our tent, then my boyfriend would start building a fire. We planned to keep it going through the night for light and warmth. The area was nice. There was a little pond near us where you could feed some ducks nearby. That's when I saw some guy standing on the other side of the pond, at the edge of a stand of trees. He was in his mid-40s, wearing blue jeans and a plaid shirt with an old trucker hat. When I spotted him, he didn't look away or wave. He just stood there staring at me. I pointed him out to my boyfriend, who stopped what he was doing and waved at the guy, but he didn't do anything but continued to gawk at us like a weirdo. I could tell my boyfriend was getting pissed off because he could tell I was feeling uneasy. That's when my boyfriend turned back towards the man and had a tense standoff for a few minutes. I knew my boyfriend didn't want to approach the man either in case he was armed, but he wasn't about to let him watch us all night. After a long, awkward stare down, the man eventually just turned around and walked away, back into the woods. Neither of us could make sense of what had just happened, but once my boyfriend got the fire going, we weren't too worried about it anymore. The sun was setting as the fire started to rage. When I started camping, I wasn't a fan, but as my boyfriend showed me the ropes, I grew to love it. We indulged in doing what all campers do, roasting hot dogs and marshmallows over the open flame, stargazing, and shameless activities in the tent before collapsing into a sleeping bag. However, this would be the night everything changed for me. After being jostled around by my boyfriend and backed up for days prior, I had to take a shit, but I felt really anxious and uncomfortable doing it out in the woods so late at night. I heard so many noises like bugs, twigs snapping, and bristling bushes around our tent. It sounded like someone or something was out there. After a few minutes, I eventually got myself to calm down and eluded the noise to simply nature. That's when I decided to handle my bathroom business. I didn't want to wake up my boyfriend just in case I was being paranoid, so I grabbed a flashlight and slowly started making my way out of the tent. But before I left, I poked my head out and looked around the campsite, just to make sure there was nothing around. And sure enough, there was nothing there, just the campfire still running nearby. So I stepped out and walked into the woods, not going too deep, but far enough that my boyfriend wouldn't smell anything if he woke up. That's when I found a suitable tree and leaned against it. I then dug a small hole, dropped my pants around my ankles, and then got to business. I was literally right in the middle of it when I started hearing the sounds of twigs snapping again. I looked around with the flashlight but couldn't see anything. I felt so vulnerable, like I had to finish and get dressed right away. Then as soon as it was over with, the pressure in my ears went away, and I heard it. It felt like breathing, like something coming from right behind me. I slowly turned the flashlight and looked over my shoulder, and there, just inches away, was a goddamn mine. I screamed and jumped backwards, frantically trying to pull up my pants. As the psycho smiled at me, he reached down into the hole I had just dug, picked up the entire log of shit, and smeared it all over his face. That's when I got up and ran away as fast as I could, then ripped my boyfriend out of the tent. I told him what I had just saw, but he was in disbelief, still shaking off the sleep. I kept looking around in a panic, but again, nothing. I forced my boyfriend to pack everything up and leave on the spot. We were able to move quickly and into the car. On the way home, he kept asking me questions about what happened. I kept saying exactly what went down, but he had a hard time believing me. He tried to convince me that I had just seen a bear in the dark, but I know what I saw. We never went camping again, obviously. I ended up having to break up with him after he continually made fun of my experience to everyone we knew, claiming I was just making up a story as an excuse for not wiping, and all sorts of other terrible things that should never be said about someone who lived through a traumatic experience. Unfortunately, I knew there was no use calling the cops. They'd be even less believing than my ex, and there wasn't really any crime committed. I do, however, wholeheartedly believe the mime was the man who was staring at us at the beginning of the evening. I just hope I never see him or another mime ever again. been a Lyft driver for about 7 years, but on one particular night, that all changed. I remember driving around the city as usual when I got the notification on my phone to pick up another customer nearby. It was this older male named Walter that looked like he was in his 40s, just an average-looking guy. When I pulled up to his location, he was with a woman that looked about half his age. I assumed they were a couple, so I rolled down my window and asked for his name and confirmed I had the right guy.
Hey, you're Walter, right?
The man just nodded without saying anything. Then they both got into the back seat. The man sat behind me while the woman sat on the passenger side. Before driving off, I glanced into the rearview mirror out of habit, and I saw them both staring gauntly at me. I couldn't understand why, but something about the look in their eyes hit me with a sick feeling in my stomach. It was like I was looking back at two corpses, and their destination didn't make me feel any better either. It was a 30-minute drive across town to an area I knew was really sketchy. I had no choice but to drive them there, so there was nothing I could really do. Along the way, I noticed they weren't looking away from the mirror. They remained staring at me. I tried to make small talk just to break the awkwardness, saying something like,
So, how's your night? You guys must be tired, huh?
I'd never had anyone flat out ignore me like that. Sometimes, people pretend not to hear me while wearing headphones, but these weirdos were fully aware I was trying to make conversation and just shut me down. It only made the situation all the more nerve-wracking. It was so hard to focus on the road when I couldn't stop seeing their faces looking at me in the corner of my eye. All I could do was turn the music up to break the deafening silence. As we got closer to their destination, I kept looking back at them. Not only were they not looking away from me, but their facial expressions were turning more and more severe. For seemingly no reason, the man was becoming enraged, yet the woman sitting right next to him was smiling like an insane person. I was worried that they were getting upset because I kept glancing back at them, but I couldn't help it. They just wouldn't look away. My only choice was to keep going until I got to their destination, but those 30 minutes felt like an eternity. I honestly thought that we'd never get there, but then I finally reached the address. I pulled off to the curb and parked. Then I looked back a final time to say goodbye. And that's when I saw the man pull out a knife. He lunged forward, trying to slice open my throat. I was able to get a grip on the man's wrist and hold the knife back, but then he wrapped his arm around my neck and started to strangle me. I had to fight for my life, but I was slowly becoming weaker and weaker, and all I could do was hear that wretched woman laughing. That's when the unthinkable happened. It was like my whole body froze. I couldn't breathe or move. My only sensation was overwhelming pain. I then pushed the man and the knife away, and was able to escape the car while trying to sprint down the street as far away from them as possible. I started wailing and shouting for help, hoping anyone would come to my aid. I was vaguely aware they had left the car, as I could hear the muffled sounds of the back doors closing and them running away. I tried my best to hold my chest to stop the bleeding, as several random pedestrians came running towards me, and I started to pass out. The last thing I heard was shouting for an ambulance, but I was sure I'd never see it. Thankfully, I woke up in the hospital with bandages all over my chest. The knife had punctured my lung, and the doctor said that the internal bleeding had started building up around my heart and putting pressure on it, to the point that I nearly died from my heart stopping before bleeding out. I was able to survive and recover, only because I was treated immediately. A minute later, and I wouldn't have made it. As for the people that attacked me, they were identified by Lyft and arrested by the police. The couple in question was a 43-year-old man named Walter LaRoche and a 29-year-old woman named Paige LaRoche. They were both put away for attempted murder and robbery. What makes remembering that night even worse was how these people didn't even know me. We had no relation at all. No prior relationship, no past or previous Lyft rides with them. The entire thing was completely unprovoked. I just got horribly unlucky to cross paths with them that night. They knew what they were planning to do from the start. I've had to continue working as a Lyft driver since, and have been constantly terrified every single day that some passenger is going to kill me. It didn't used to be like this, but now I have to live like this every day while trying to make a living. This story was inspired by a very creepy, bizarre incident regarding a 43-year-old man and a 29-year-old woman who was accused of stabbing a Lyft driver in North Central Edmonton. On Tuesday, November 5th, 2024, At approximately 9:45 p.m., police responded to reports of an injured male. Upon arrival, police located a male Lyft driver who had been stabbed. Officers immediately administered first aid and transported the 35-year-old man to a hospital. The driver was treated for serious, life-threatening injuries and has since been discharged. Investigators have since determined that the driver picked up an adult male and female for a scheduled Lyft ride. Upon arrival at their intended destination, the male passenger stabbed the driver. The driver was able to escape the vehicle and sought assistance from bystanders, who then called 911. Both suspects then fled in the vehicle, abandoning it nearby moments later and fleeing on foot. With assistance of Lyft, detectives identified the suspects and took them into custody. Walter LaRoche, 43, and Paige LaRoche, 29, were both arrested and charged with attempted murder and robbery. Walter LaRoche is facing the additional charge of possession of a weapon. But what makes this case all the more disturbing was how the suspects and Lyft driver were not known to one another, making this violent attack completely unprovoked. It was St. Patrick's Day of 2015, when my friend and I started the evening at his place. We pre-gamed there for a bit before making our way to the bars. We took an Uber downtown where all the bar crawling was happening. We had about several bars in mind that we wanted to hit up that night, but unfortunately, every bar on the strip seemed busy as hell, with huge lineups outside all of them. We ended up lining up behind one of the bars and waiting like everyone else. As annoyed as I was, there was lots to see while waiting. Thousands of people walking by wearing the same shade of green, and probably not a single one of them sober. People were chugging drinks outside the bars in the crawl, blazing it up in public, puking in the gutters. It was quite the scene this night. I remember noticing all kinds of different people too, from the typical half-naked woman, drunk guys trying to get at them, belligerent people stumbling, stuff like that. And then I saw this short homeless guy coming towards us from down the street. The guy looked malnourished, and was one of the many short men dressed as a leprechaun that night. I can tell the man was a hobo from the way his face and clothes looked. I watched him come down the street, stopping every other person to panhandle or harass women. Typical crazy downtown hobo behavior. He eventually made it to the line we were waiting in, and immediately started harassing people. Finally, he made it to me and my friend. He started asking us for money, in my drunken state. Having watched him be a menace to everyone he saw, I thought I'd be a wise guy.
Hey, can you spare a couple bucks?
No, man, sorry. Don't got any cash.
What about you then? Gonna help a guy out?
If you're a leprechaun, well, why don't you just make a pot of gold appear?
Burn it out, you piece of shit!
Suddenly, the guy charged and tackled me. In just a few seconds, he took me to the ground with his hands around my neck and started strangling me. The whole time my friend was trying to help, the man was telling me to
burn in hell! Burn in hell! Burn in hell! St. Patrick's Day is gonna be marked as the day you die!
It took the whole crowd of people in line to finally pull that freak off me and shove him back into the street. He walked off, cursing me, saying he was going to come back and finish me off. But my friend told me to forget about it. Unfortunately, that guy killed my buzz, so I was pissed off. About 45 minutes later, we finally got let into the bar. We stayed there until they closed, getting hammered and drinking so much to the point where we got totally belligerent like the rest of the people here. But by the end of the night, I was antsy to leave as they were ushering us out. I didn't want to run into that psycho creepy homeless leprechaun again, so I did everything in my power to procrastinate. My friend had convinced me that there was no way that guy held so much of a grudge that he would actually stick around to wait for us to leave. He probably just kept going around town, freaking people out with this weird face, and bumming whatever people were willing to give him so he would go away. We eventually left with a large crowd all leaving at the same time. I remember looking around, keeping an eye out for the freak. There seemed to be no sign of danger. We were at the curb with a bunch of other people, all waiting for our rides to show up. But then just a few minutes later, something insane happened. A man engulfed in flames came running around the corner. Everyone turned to look at him at the same time in a moment of shock. And he was coming straight towards us. When I looked closer, I saw it was the same leprechaun that tried to kill me.
Burn with me! Burn in hell with me!
I turned away and started running for my life. My friend followed me as the psycho chased after us. We ran through the street like wild animals, screaming for help. Finally, we saw police officers and went straight for them. We ran past them before we stopped and looked back. The flaming leprechaun was in a standoff with the cops who were protecting us. He didn't seem to care that he was on fire. He just kept screaming, but it wasn't from pain. It was rage. They kept telling him to get down, but all he did was inch closer. For a second, I thought he was going to burst through them and set us all on fire, but then they tased him to the ground. Then they rushed him and put out the fire before restraining him. They apprehended him and put him in a cruiser, then asked us some questions, but I was pretty much in shock. Who wouldn't be after a man set himself on fire and tried to take them down with him? Till this day, I've never been able to think about St. Patrick's Day without seeing a flaming leprechaun rushing at me, screaming at me to burn in hell with him. This story was inspired by a disturbing St. Patrick's Day incident regarding a homeless man who set himself on fire on a Hoboken street, near where hundreds of revelers were hopping bar to bar for an annual St. Patrick's Day pub crawl. Police received a call at about 11 p.m. Saturday that a man was trying to set himself on fire. Responding officers found the man with his jacket on fire and shouted for him to get on the ground so they could extinguish it, but he refused. Once the fire spread, the man started screaming, and officers were able to push him to the ground to put out the blaze. Thankfully, the man was not seriously injured and was transported to the hospital. The crawl continued for business as usual, with 11 people arrested for everything from assault to narcotics possession. There were also over 100 violations of city ordinances, barring public drinking and urination. When I was in high school, I had this friend named Thomas. We had gone to the same middle school together but got split up in my freshman year. But we stayed in touch and hung out occasionally. During one weekend, he invited me to sleep over at his place. Thomas was an only child who lived with just his dad. They lived in a small house since his dad was divorced, so it was just the two of them. Plus, Thomas's dad was pretty chill and let us stay up as late as we wanted. I remember this one night. We gamed, watched TV, ordered pizza, that kind of vibe. When it was time to pass out, Thomas slept in his bed, of course, while I slept on the floor in my sleeping bag. I fell asleep fairly quickly, as I've always been a light sleeper. About an hour later, I woke up to a creaking noise. I looked around and realized the bedroom door had just opened a little. I assumed Thomas or myself must have forgotten to close the door properly. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep with that thing open, so I got up and closed the door. Then I went back to my sleeping bag. I eventually was able to fall back asleep, but then an hour later, I was woken up again. This time, I had to pee. I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep properly with a full bladder, so I got up to use the washroom. But as I was getting out of my sleeping bag, I saw the door open again. Now I had chills running down my spine. It was just open by a little bit like the last time, and I was certain that I had shut it fully earlier. Despite being weirded out, I forced myself to go and take a piss. So, I opened the door the rest of the way and stood there for a bit before stepping through, just to make sure it was clear, and it was. Then I walked across the hall to the bathroom to do my business. When I came back to the bedroom, I closed the door again, making sure that it was absolutely shut. I crawled back into my sleeping bag and forced myself to try and fall asleep once again, alluding the situation to just the airflow in the house causing the door to open. Barely an hour later, I woke up tossing and turning in my sleeping bag. I was struggling to fall asleep for some reason. That's when I opened my eyes slightly amidst my sleep and was chilled to my core, only to see that the door was wide open. I shot up and looked for Thomas, but he wasn't in his bed. I looked around the room and saw him standing facing the wall, slowly banging his forehead over and over again. I was freaked the hell out and saying something like,
Thomas, what the hell are you doing? You're scaring the shit out of me. Thomas? Thomas! Ah! What the hell is going on?
That's when out of nowhere, a scary-ass looking mime came into the room and was standing right over me. I screamed and fell backwards, trying to get to my feet as the mime came closer and closer. He was smiling with a face like a demon straight from hell, as he put a finger to one side of his throat and dragged it across his neck to the other side. He then bent over and smiled as he was getting in my face.
What do you want from me? Stay away from me! Please! Thomas! Help me!
The mime said nothing. He just pretended to tie a noose and wrap it around my neck as I was paralyzed with fear. He then made a motion to tighten it, and I literally felt the pressure. Then, he took the other end and started pulling on it. I don't even know how it was even possible, but in that moment, my feet lifted off the ground. I was mid-air as the mime was looking at me dead in the eyes. As he hanged me by an imaginary rope, I didn't know what to do. I tried to claw at the rope, but it was pointless. Finally, as I felt my death quickly approaching, I had a rush of adrenaline and kicked the mime as hard as I could with both feet. Finally breaking free, I crashed to the floor and sprinted the hell out of the house, abandoning all my belongings. The only possession of mine I was able to bring was my phone, which was already in my pocket. I remember running down the street until I was a few blocks down. There, I called an Uber and got home just as dawn hit. Soon after, I started getting texts from Thomas, acting like nothing happened, asking me stuff like why I left early since we had plans for the following day, and stuff like that. I just ghosted him. I didn't know what the hell to say to him. All I knew is that I never wanted to see him again. I don't know what Thomas and his dad had going on in that house, but it's evil. Thankfully, Thomas and I don't go to the same school anymore, so I haven't had to see him since. Till this day, I also can't stop thinking about what happened that night. Sometimes, I can still feel the rope around my neck. I used to drive an old Honda Nissan. It got me from point A to point B into work, where I saved up money for years until I could eventually afford to replace it. And when that time eventually came, I decided to get what I had been hearing the most hype about, a Tesla. I knew it was supposed to be faster than any gas-powered car at the same price, and that it had a ton of futuristic features. What ended up selling me on it was the autopilot system, where the car could drive itself. I was too scared to use it for a while though. It took me about a week of owning the Tesla before I tried it out. I set a route from my house to all the way downtown. The car drove just fine through my neighborhood, and it did good on the bigger roads too. The real test came when it was time to get on the highway. I got a little freaked out as the Tesla started picking up speed, but to my surprise, the Tesla autopilot did great on the highway. I let it go for a few minutes, and then after I built up some confidence, and switched the autopilot from normal mode to speed demon mode, that's when the throttle pressed to the floor and started accelerating like a street racer. I was scared out of my mind, but then I realized the thing was driving better than I ever had, pulling off moves I could never do. I felt like I was cheating death every 5 seconds, blasting past car after car, doing basically nothing to drive myself. All I had to do was keep my hand on the steering wheel with a little pressure. Then the computer assumed I was still in control. Of course, I was not in control in the slightest. All I was doing was gawking out the side windows and watching everything go by in a blur, weaving through traffic like an absolute psychopath. I got so confident that I even laid my seat back and closed my eyes. I thought it would be funny to call up my friend on FaceTime and have him think I was sleeping in my car, only to point the camera out the window going 100 miles an hour.
Hey dude, you shouldn't be FaceTiming me while you're driving.
Change your tampon and calm down. I'm just in my new Tesla. Look, I don't even have to drive. This thing is doing it for me.
What the hell, you're not driving? I don't think it's supposed to work like that. You still have to pay attention, man. Isn't that stuff in beta or whatever?
You're the only beta here, dude. Anyway, I'm gonna catch some Z's while I'm making my way downtown. Later.
Wait, don't!
I felt like a king. Gone were the days of having to drive myself around like a peasant. I told myself I'd never drive a car again. Autopilot from here on out, no exceptions. If I ever got pulled over for going too fast, then it wasn't my fault. It was all on Tesla. I got so used to driving on the highway that I actually started dozing off a bit. Things changed when I got off the highway though, and started driving through the streets of downtown. The speed demon was still speeding, weaving and racing through traffic. Only now the motions were even more exaggerated. I got so annoyed that I was about to get up and turn the autopilot back to normal mode. But all I saw when I put my seat up was a crowd of people. I realized too late that the car had lost control of itself, and I was about to plow straight into all of them. I blacked out on impact, and remember waking up on the dashboard, crammed up against the cracked windshield. There was smoke everywhere. All I could hear was the people outside screaming and crying. Moments later, I was dragged out of the car and placed on a stretcher. That's when I started to regain consciousness and realized what had just happened. The Tesla malfunctioned, and I wasn't there to correct it. That means all these injured people I saw getting taken into ambulance were hurt by me. That's when I started panicking and got off the stretcher begging for forgiveness.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean for this to happen. Please forgive me, I'm sorry. Do that later, asshole. Get back on the stretcher.
I was panicking out of my mind in the ambulance. I didn't want to go to jail. I just wanted to go back 5 minutes and change everything. But of course, that wasn't going to happen. I was treated at the hospital, and as soon as the doctor said I was fine, I was discharged right in the hands of 2 cops who took me to jail. I found out that I had injured several people, and unfortunately killed one man, a husband and a father. I was sentenced to 5 years in prison, and my license was permanently suspended. The Tesla was totaled, so it's gone anyway. I've been out of prison for about a year now, and I spent a long time blaming myself. But then I realized I'm not the one at fault, so I'm currently seeking legal action against Tesla for allowing their dangerous and unreliable autopilot software to be operating 2-ton death traps on our streets. But that won't change anything as the damage has already been done. This story was inspired by a disturbing Tesla incident regarding a 44-year-old husband and father named Yoshihiro Yumida, who passed away in April 2010 when a Tesla Model X with autopilot turned on and crashed into a group that was involved in an earlier motorcycle accident outside Tokyo. It was alleged that the car in front of the Tesla changed lanes to avoid the group of bikers, but the Tesla driver was repeatedly dozing off, and the autopilot failed to change lanes and accelerated at the group. Umida's relatives filed a lawsuit against Tesla, claiming that the company's autopilot system is defective and incapable of handling common driving scenarios, and that its system for detecting drivers who aren't paying attention is fatally defective. The judge sided with Tesla's motion to dismiss, suggesting Japan is the most appropriate venue for the case based on the forum nonconvenience law. Forum nonconvenience says that a US court can dismiss a case when another court may be better suited to hear it. The case has yet to be filed in Japan. The Tesla driver was officially sentenced to 3 years in prison and up to 5 years of suspension.
Being a Lyft driver isn't as easy as people think it is. Between gas, the wear and tear on my car, and the huge cut that Lyft takes, I have to work long hours to make ends meet. It isn't just the traffic that I have to deal with either. Depending on the area I end up in and the time of day, I pick up every sort of person. From the pushy Karens that want me to drive recklessly so they aren't late for some PTA meeting during the day, to the wild, messy drunks at night. I get them all. No matter how much of a hassle they can be, I still never decline or cancel rides just because I think they're going to be trouble. I need the money, and if I were to pass up every person I didn't want to pick up, I'd be broke. However, recently, one particular passenger changed everything for me. When I was driving around waiting for another notification and saw her pop up, I had no idea what I was in for. Even as I was driving up to her from a distance, I still couldn't tell what was happening. I thought I saw a big pile of garbage on the curb near where my phone was telling me to go, but as I got closer, I realized something. It was a woman, my passenger. By the time I was parking, I had to stop farther away from her than usual. I was awestruck. This woman was the most horrifically shaped, tastelessly dressed, morbidly obese fat lard I had ever seen. She looked like the human centipede if the centipede ate itself. When she started walking, or more like waddling toward me, I swear I could feel the earth beneath me shaking, and I could hear the wet slaps of her own flesh flaps clapping against each other. I knew there was no way in hell my suspension could handle a load as heavy as her. In my head, I envisioned all 4 of my tires popping the second she sat down. Before she could get up to the car, I locked the doors and started rolling down the window. She ignored me at first, but then she realized the door handle wouldn't budge against her bulging sausage fingers, so she went ballistic on me.
Open the door! I'm trying to get in!
No, you're not! Get away from my car! I'm canceling the ride!
You skinny son of a bitch! This is discrimination! You see this? I'm filming you! Say what you just said to me!
I'm not letting you in my car, you fat, ugly thing. I don't want to drive you anywhere with my bumper grinding against the pavement.
Excuse you? I'm beautiful!
Please. Did it hurt when you fell from heaven, or did you just kill the dinosaurs?
Keep running your mouth and see what happens.
And what the hell do you know about running? Get away from my car and order an Uber XL or party bus, Majin Buu! Suddenly, the landfill came barreling toward me. I thought I'd have enough time to roll up my window and back away, but before I knew it, she flopped onto the hood. The front of the car immediately hit the ground with a huge thunk. I slammed the gas pedal, but the tires just started spinning without going anywhere. Seconds later, the behemoth was crawling up the windshield, shattering it and getting to the top of my car. The frame started to buckle and give under her weight, making me think I was about to be crushed. My only option was to get out. I ran 10 feet from the car before I stopped and looked back, realizing she was literally the same size as my car. When she saw me, she rolled off, hitting the ground so hard it felt like an earthquake. Her massive body of fat protected her, and though I didn't expect her to be able to get up, she rolled onto her feet and came after me.
Come here! Let me have a little taste! I am woman, hear me?
Leave me alone or I'm calling the cops! Help! Somebody! This woman is trying to eat me! I only had one shot of getting away with my car. I slowly led Chubbs away, walking back step by step, and then when I made enough distance between her and the car, I ran around her and got back in. Then I sped off. Once I was clear, I called the police. I thought for sure she wouldn't be able to get far, but somehow the cops said she wasn't there when they showed up. Maybe she hitched a ride in the back of a semi-truck. That video she posted, which conveniently ended the moment she started trying to kill me, got posted to the internet and went viral. Apparently, she's some kind of rapper, but the only rapping she's familiar with is the kind around candy and cheeseburgers. It's been several weeks since this incident, and every day the drastic effects it's had on my life just become more apparent. I'm struggling to support my family, and I've repeated nightmares about being crushed under the cataclysmic weight of that horrible woman. This story was inspired by a bizarre Lyft incident regarding a Detroit woman who filed a lawsuit against the rideshare company Lyft, saying that a driver refused her service because she was quote-unquote too big to fit in his car. A spokesperson for the company said they can't comment on pending litigation, but released the following statement, saying, "This comes after the Detroit woman, Dajua Blanding, said she was denied a ride from Lyft due to her weight, prompting her to file a lawsuit." Blanding captured the incident on video and posted it to her social media page, which has been shared thousands of times. According to the video, Blanding paid Lyft for a ride for her residence to a party at her cousin's house. About 10 to 15 minutes later, a Lyft driver arrived in a Mercedes-Benz sedan. Blanding walked towards the Lyft driver's vehicle, and the Lyft driver locked his doors and started to drive away. She asked the driver what he was doing, and the driver told her that she was too big to get into his car. Under the law, refusing someone transportation due to their weight is no different than refusing someone transportation based on their race or religion, said Blanding's attorney. That driver claimed that Blanding was too big to fit into the back seat of his vehicle and that his tires could not support her weight. The Lyft driver also stated that he had had this problem in the past and that overweight people need to order Lyft XLs. Despite Blanding assuring the Lyft driver that she could fit in the back seat, he kept his doors locked and sped off.
I drive a taxi cab in New York City. I work full-time under my company contract, and when I've reached my limit of hours for the week, I also drive Uber in my wife's car. The cab earns better money, and I'm technically not supposed to drive for any rideshare companies, but it's all to support my family. Of course, I want to get as much money as possible, and that comes from getting more fares. But there are certain events that make the worst passengers out of people. One of those grueling special events is St. Patrick's Day. Everybody and their grandma wants to hit the streets of downtown and get absolutely plastered on St. Patrick's Day. Unfortunately for me, just because they're not okay with drunk driving doesn't mean they're not going to behave like animals in the backseat of my car. Even on the way to the bars, people celebrating St. Patty's Day are already drunk from pre-gaming in their apartments. And then on the way back, they're even worse. They're loud, vulgar, sweaty, and at any moment liable to throw up all over my car. However, the money is quite lucrative, so even though I hate working that day, I always do it. There was a St. Patty's Day one year that I clearly remember even years after it happened. I had just dropped off my 15th customer or so downtown, and I was parked, waiting for another fare in a sea of green drunk people. That's when I saw this one couple stumbling down the street towards me. They were both drunk, but the woman was 10 times more wasted than the man. She looked like she had puke running down her neck and had gotten it all over her boyfriend's shirt. She was hanging off his neck as he dragged her down the street, and to be honest, the situation didn't look too good for either of them. They were crossing the street and headed for me, but then out of nowhere, a car came flying around the corner and rammed right into them. They flew apart like bowling pins. The man rolled over the top of the car, but the woman got dragged underneath and ran over. The driver didn't even let off the gas. He just sped off. For a moment, I was in shock. But then as a crowd of people swarmed to the couple's aid, I knew what I had to do. I put my car in gear, and I raced after the asshole who hit them. I quickly caught up, but as soon as they realized I was following them, they started going even faster. I'd never seen someone drive so recklessly. The guy was blowing through red lights, weaving through cars and crowds of pedestrians, and even riding up the sidewalks. I knew he had to be drunk out of his mind, and I was just waiting for him to blow by a cop. But somehow, he made it all the way to the freeway entrance, and he still hadn't been caught. I didn't want to let this guy get away. In my mind, I had just watched him murder 2 innocent people, and I was going to make sure he suffered the consequences. I followed onto the freeway and we got up to speed. He quickly slammed over to the fast lane and started going over 80 miles an hour. I did everything I could to stay behind him despite everything he was doing to shake me. I followed his every stupid stunt, every weave through closing gaps, and I even rode onto the shoulder when he did. However, with every close call, I started to realize more and more that he could easily hurt someone else. That, or it could be me who wipes out, and then my kids might not have a father anymore. I started to let up on the gas, and then before I knew it, they disappeared in front of the cars ahead of me. I was so pissed off I had to pull over and let off some steam.
I can't believe I let you get away, you piece of shit! I swear to God, if I ever see you again, I'll run you over myself!
I started to head back toward the city, thinking the whole chase had been a waste. A stupid and irresponsible risk with no reward. Then, I remember something. The cab company had me install a dash cam. I quickly went back to the scene of the hit and run. The victims had already been taken to the hospital, but there were still some cops lingering in the area, questioning bystanders. I went up to them and told them I had footage of the guy's license plate. Thankfully, with that information, they were able to meet the guy at his house and arrest him. From what I heard, he got off easy, only because the people he hit were lucky enough to survive. The boyfriend only had minor injuries, but the girl suffered severe injuries from being dragged under the car. She was able to make a decent recovery, though I have no idea how the lasting effects are still making her life more difficult. As for the lowlife who nearly killed them with his car, he didn't even go to jail. They actually gave him his license back after a year, back with just restrictions. But that guy should never get behind the wheel of a car again. I still think he should have served at least a few years. The criminal courts have really failed on this one in my opinion, but I can still hope that they reamed him in civil court and took him for everything he's worth. This story was inspired by a horrific incident regarding a 22-year-old man named Brian F. Irvin, who hit and severely injured a woman with his vehicle on St. Patrick's Day. According to court documents, Irvin and several of his friends started drinking the morning of March 17th and continued throughout much of the day. While driving, he struck a woman as she and her boyfriend were crossing an intersection. Irvin's blood alcohol content was measured at 0.13% after the crash, and although one of the passengers urged him to stop after the accident, he drove away. A taxicab driver, Mike Travis, witnessed the event and followed Irvin's car until Irvin was aware that he was being tailed and lost the cab. Police were alerted by Travis, who also copied down Irvin's license plate number, and were waiting at his home to arrest him. Irvin pleaded guilty to felony charges and leaving the scene of an incident without reporting it to police, and 2 counts of misdemeanor driving while intoxicated. He received a 1-year conditional discharge for the misdemeanors, and will be required to install an alcohol sensor lock on his vehicle when his driving privileges are restored. I took a Lyft the other day, and it's going to be the last time I ever take a ride from a stranger. All I wanted to do was go to my friend's place to meet up before going out to drink, so I didn't want to drive there myself. I was all dressed up for my first night out in a while. A few minutes later, my Lyft driver pulled up. I went around the back of his car to check the license plate as the usual safety protocol, and it matched. It was just being driven by someone I knew was going to be a creep, because when I got in the car, the guy immediately gave me the chills. The guy looked older, balding, and just gave me bad vibes overall. As expected, as soon as I got in, he tried to make annoying small talk and quickly crossed the line.
So, what are you up to tonight?
Just going to my boyfriend's house.
I didn't have a boyfriend. I just said that in hopes that the guy would leave me alone. That's when he said,
Come on, don't lie. I can tell by the way you're dressed that you're single.
Good one. I'm just going to go on the phone with my friend now, if you didn't mind.
The guy then continued driving, as I got on a call with my friend as an excuse to not have that guy talk to me. He wasn't just irritating though, he really did make me nervous. What made it even worse was that the entire time I was on the phone, the driver would glance back at me through the rearview mirror here and there. I tried to look away and ignore it, but he was staring at me more than he was watching the road. It was only when I locked eyes with him that he would look away. When we were just a few minutes away from my friend's house, I figured it was okay since I was almost there, so I hung up. Literally just a few seconds later, I looked forward and saw the driver pull his sweater up to cover his face. I was so confused. I assumed he was implying that I smelled bad or something, but then a few seconds later, I suddenly felt extremely tired. I couldn't help myself from slumping over and starting to drift off. I was fighting to stay awake when the driver looked back at me, his eyes smiling at me like a psychopath. As he laughed, the car started filling with smoke. Something in the front seat was spewing gas into the air. I tried to hold my breath, but it got to me so fast that I got the slightest breath of it. My body instantly went limp, and I started losing consciousness. Everything in my head was telling me that if I didn't get out of this car, I was going to be kidnapped, tortured, and trafficked to be used for the rest of my life. The car was completely full of smoke, and all I could do was hear the driver talking. I couldn't understand what he was saying, but I knew it was about what he was going to do with me. He sounded so evil. For a moment, I thought it was all over. The little bit of air I had in my lungs was almost gone. In a few seconds, I was hyperventilating, fighting for my life as the man zoomed down the road like a maniac. Miraculously, I felt the car stop. Something was telling me to look up. We were stopped at a red light. I knew this was my last chance. I struggled to unbuckle my seatbelt as the driver tried to reach back and grab me. That's when I was able to get my seatbelt off and get out of the car in the nick of time. I began sprinting down the street screaming for help at every pedestrian I saw. The driver saw all the people witnessing what was happening and immediately sped off. People came to help me, but thankfully, I had already saved myself. The cops were called, and I was transported to a hospital. As soon as I was able to, I reported the driver to Lyft, screenshotting all of his information and sending it in. Now, all I could hope is that the police are able to find this guy. Ever since this event, I've been terrified to use the rideshare apps like Lyft and Uber. This story was inspired by an extremely disturbing incident regarding a California woman who was able to miraculously escape an alleged kidnapping attempt by a Lyft driver in Nashville. The police report states that officers responded to a call after a report of an attempted kidnapping that occurred on January 15th. The victim said she was in a Lyft downtown, and during the ride, when the driver put a sweatshirt over his mouth and nose to cover himself, that's when the victim said she saw a gas-like substance come out of a cup holder. The victim said that she wasn't able to talk after smelling some of the gas, and that the driver kept watching her in the mirror of the car. She told investigators that she felt like she was going to pass out. That's when she held her breath, opened the car door, and took off running to a nearby hotel where she waited for a friend to pick her up. The victim said that she called Lyft to report the driver. She also said that the driver was using a silver SUV, but she didn't know the make or model of the car. Police have since been working with Lyft to attempt to identify the driver.
When I was in college, I drank pretty heavily and partied often. The biggest event of the year was St. Patrick's Day, of course. There was this one street that everyone would go to. There weren't many bars in town, so everyone would go to this one street to publicly drink at. It was St. Patrick's Day, so of course the only unwritten rule was to wear green and bring your own booze. That was because the bars that were around were too packed to get in, so it was recommended to keep some booze on your person. Like many people, I filled a water bottle with liquor. Then me and my friends would pre-drink before making our way to the bars to try and get a table. But, of course, everything was already full, so we hit the street. By the time the day started, it was chaotic. Everyone at the whole college was there. The thirsty frat boys, the skanky sorority girls, the nerds, the freaks, the emo kids. Hell, I think even some of the professors were partying. At first, the vibes were all pretty good. People were shouting, cheering, and dancing in the street. But then things started to change. People went from tipsy to drunk, and with the mob mentality going around, things got out of hand fast, and the fights were starting to break out. Before long, everybody was absolutely wasted. There was literal mosh pits forming in the street, and people were crowd surfing like they were at a metal concert. I even saw people climbing up poles and throwing shit at people. People were now not only losing control of their actions, but also their bodies. I saw dozens of people wiped out, rolling around in puddles of their own vomit. Eventually, I was at my limit. My friend wanted me to grab more drinks within the crowd, but there was no way I was going to join him. At this point, I was belligerently drunk. I told my friend I was going to find somewhere to sit, so I stumbled around for a while, but everywhere I looked was either soaked in urine or was actively getting pissed on. Even the chicks were popping squats and letting it rip. There were 10,000 drunk idiots on the street, and I was one of them. Finally, I found a gap between two houses that didn't look like it had been pissed on, so I sat against the wall on the ground. I had a cup of water I had gotten from somewhere, so I just sipped on it, trying to sober up. After several minutes, I managed to get the spins to a manageable level. I was there for a while, so I started to doze off, and then suddenly it started pouring rain. It was like the skies just opened up and dumped water on me, but I didn't give a shit. If anything, it felt refreshing. I didn't even open my eyes. Judging by the way the crowd wasn't reacting with screams, it seemed everybody else was fine with it too. But then, as quickly as it came on, the rain started to fizzle out. I guessed it was just one of those random small rain clouds, or maybe we were at the very edge of a storm skimming by us. After about 30 seconds or so, it was gone completely, only for it to come back again just a few moments later. I got confused when I heard the way it was falling. It was just irregular, but I was so drunk I could barely understand. I thought it would be a good idea to have a gulp of water, so I dumped the last of the cup into my mouth and swallowed it. But then, I immediately knew something was wrong. The water tasted like shit. I started gagging, desperately trying to hold onto my lunch, and as I struggled, I heard something above me. It was laughter. I slowly looked up to see three men standing on the roof over me.
Dude! You just drank piss!
You liked that golden shower, didn't you?
Oh God!
Might be able to squeeze out a little bit more for you, bro.
The realization hit me like a truck that the rain I was enjoying earlier wasn't rain. It was piss. I even drank it. I sobered up immediately and went into a fit of rage like I'd never done before. I ran out into the street, screaming and smashing through windows, tackling anybody who tried to come near me. It didn't take long for the crowd to catch on to what had happened. They saw me freaking out, soaked in piss, and couldn't stop laughing. I became a mockery and felt embarrassed and shit-faced, literally. Before I could cause any more damage, I tried to climb up onto the roof and fight those assholes, but the cops showed up and arrested me. It's probably the best thing that could have happened to me in that moment, to be honest. I was the only one person out of 100 that got arrested that day, but I bet I'm the only one that got pissed on, drank the piss by accident, and then got thrown in a jail cell. Ever since then, I steer clear of any big gathering where drinking is involved, and I barely drink at all. Once a year, on St. Patrick's Day, I'm forced to remember that awful feeling. This story was inspired by a mass ticket affair where police wrote approximately 197 tickets and arrested 4 people as a result of St. Patrick's Day celebrations in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. The 197 tickets were for provincial offenses, such as for having open liquor, being intoxicated, and urinating in public. Officers at the scene said there were likely about 10,000 students on the street in the early afternoon. In total, there were 11 criminal codes charged, including assault, offensive weapon, narcotic possession, impaired driving, breach of probation, and theft and possession of stolen property. We wanted to make a story based on the kind of things that could have transpired from such crimes that St. Patrick's Day evening.
I'm an engineer at a large Tesla manufacturing plant. I specialize in the implementation of software into various hardware applications made by the company. When I signed up to be an employee at Tesla, I wanted to work on the autonomous driving feature of the Tesla cars. However, my higher-ups determined my skills would be better used in their more experimental sector. That's how I ended up working on, or rather with, the humanoid Tesla robots. Those things have always creeped me the hell out. They look like the things from that Will Smith movie, I, Robot. I'm always expecting one of them to wink at me or tackle me through a high-rise window because it gained consciousness while I was digging around in its brain. Unfortunately, I don't have a choice but to work with them. I usually spend my days at work cooped up in a small research room. I'm usually on the other side of the glass from the robot as I watch it perform various tasks. Whenever there are faults, I typically just report them to the software department so they can fix the code. However, there are sometimes hardware issues that are catastrophic. I just shut the thing down and send it off to the appropriate department for repairs and stuff. But there are certain occasions in which the issue is minor enough that I'm qualified to fix it on the spot. In those cases, I have to enter the room with the robot, which I absolutely hated and dreaded doing. There are numerous protocols in place to remotely shut the robot down before entering the room, then to cut the power to the motor functions before doing anything else to it. But they still never put me at ease. These things have superhuman strength with subhuman restraint. The hydraulic strength it has in simply clenching its fist has enough power to crush a human femur, the strongest bone in the body. The only relief I have in working this job is that I'm almost never alone in the control room. It's against safety regulations to enter the room with the robot alone. There must be at least 2 people. Crucially though, this rule is the same no matter how many robots are in the room, so it is still possible to be outnumbered by the machines. This exact scenario happened to me recently. I was working with my colleague Adam and a few other engineers in the control room. On this particular day, we were doing an especially complex test. There were 3 robots in a line, testing their ability to complete tasks in a chain, just as they would be done in a real assembly line. During the test, one of the robots stopped working. It didn't mess up as it was performing perfectly fine until there was a minor power fluctuation, and then it just froze up. The other robots on either side of it continued to function as normal, but they stopped once they realized the chain was broken. Adam and I disabled all 3 robots from the control room, but we were unable to diagnose the issue from there. Suspecting the problem might require a manual reset, Adam and I prepared to go into the testing room together. I went to the robot at the end of the line and opened up its interface to ensure it was powered down. Adam stopped at the first one to do the same before going to the robot in the middle. All he had to do was ensure the motor functions were off, then hit the reset button. Something as simple as resetting your router when your internet goes out. But as Adam walked to the backside of the robot, it turned around and grabbed him. It had him by the throat and raised him into the air, squeezing his neck. I rushed over and smashed the emergency stop button, but it did nothing. The robot swung over with lightning speed and struck me with Adam's body. I crashed into the wall behind me and hit my head. Then I fell to the floor as I watched the robot smash Adam into the ground and rip him to shreds.
Help! Get this thing off me! Ah! Adam! No! 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 Ah!
The robot came after me, but I quickly rolled under the assembly equipment. Then I bolted for the door. That thing was a split second away from ripping the door out of my hands and escaping into the factory, but I just barely managed to get the door locked and trap it inside. It immediately started to break through. It didn't have eyes, but I could tell through the window that it wanted to kill me and destroy me just like it had done to Adam. Thankfully, before the wretched thing could get out, the security team came and decommissioned the machine with ballistic force. I barely escaped with my life. Yet Tesla is committed to underreporting the severity and frequency of the injury sustained by the workers in their plants. Adam's death was never reported. The whole situation was downgraded from death and dismemberment to just a minor injury. I know that disclosing this, even anonymously, will surely have me fired and sued, but the public needs to know how dangerous these abominations are. I'm terrified as hell when or if Tesla decides to mass produce these things. This story was inspired by a horrific incident regarding a Tesla engineer who was injured by a robot that pinned him to the wall at the company's giant factory in Texas. The 2021 incident came to light through an injury record filed to 2 regulators. It noted the injury type as laceration, cut, and open wound, and recorded the quote-unquote cause object as a robot. The robot allegedly pushed its claws into the man's body and drew blood from his back and arm, 2 witnesses said. After another worker hit the emergency stop button, the engineer managed to escape the robot's grasp and fell down a chute designed to collect scrap metal, leaving a trail of blood behind him, one of the witnesses said. The incident happened when the engineer was programming the software that controls the robots, which cut car parts from aluminum. 2 of the robots were disabled, but the third was inadvertently left on. As it went through its normal motions, it caught the worker in its claws. It has also been reported that, Almost 1 in 21 workers at Tesla's Giga Texas factory was injured on the job in 2022, which isn't good when compared to the industry average of 1 in 30. But one thing that's disturbing about all of this robot attack talk was how one happened recently and was caught on camera. A shocking incident at a festival in China has sparked heated debate about the safety of AI-powered robots. A viral video circulating on social media appears to show a humanoid robot moving erratically toward festival goers before security guards intervene. In the video, one of the robots can be seen unexpectedly moving towards the crowd in an aggressive manner. While it remains unclear whether it attempted to hit people or simply stumbled due to a barricade, the situation escalated quickly, prompting security personnel to step in. Some claim the robot was attacking attendees, while others argue it was simply a malfunction. Either way, it was downright terrifying, considering movies like I, Robot and Terminator exist. When I was still living with my parents, I had the luxury of living within walking distance of downtown. I didn't have to commute by bus or train or anything. I could literally get there in about 20 minutes tops. I remember walking there one day to meet up with 2 of my buddies. There was a really popular part of town with an open-air mall. We looked around in the shops but didn't buy anything as we didn't have a lot of money to spend. We mostly just messed around and caused trouble. The place was always packed, especially on the weekends, so it was easy to get away with doing stuff and not get caught. The whole night was fun. However, we all had curfews, so we eventually had to go our separate ways and head home. That was around 8, when it was dark out and the place was getting busier than ever, and also when a lot more of the street performers would come out. Out of all the performers I saw, one stuck out to me. It was a mime. I already disliked mimes more than regular clowns, but this guy was intense. His face paint was scary as hell and his face looked almost inhuman, like in the Terrifier movies. I wanted to just walk past him, but there was a huge crowd around him standing in my way at a bus stop. I don't know why so many people were interested in him, but he was apparently quite captivating. I stopped at the edge of the crowd, and that's when I saw the mime parting his way through it, trying to get to me. He was staring at me, doing his mime act, and it was starting to freak me out. I felt trapped for some reason, because the weirdo started putting up invisible walls with his hands. He was pulling them up from the ground and hammering them together. I'd never seen a mime do that. Then, I realized he was building a box around me, and the whole time, he kept staring at me. I've always been claustrophobic, and even though I knew they weren't real walls, I still couldn't stand the idea of being trapped. All the people in the crowd were staring at me, laughing at my reaction, making the whole situation even worse. I panicked and ran home. I was terrified, so I ran for a solid 5 minutes, putting what I thought was more than enough distance behind me. I had to get away from the crowds, out of downtown, back to the calmer section of the walk home. I was only about 10 minutes away since I had run so far, but I was out of breath, so I decided to take a break. When I resumed heading home, I took it easy. I needed to keep myself from having some kind of panic attack again. But then, a few blocks from my house, I spotted a figure ahead of me, standing motionless below a streetlight. As I got closer, my heart sank as I realized it was the same mime. He was staring directly at me, smiling like a creep. I didn't understand how the hell he got there, or if this was some kind of mime look-alike. I just knew I had no choice but to keep going toward him. My house was at the end of the street, and there was no other path to take to get there. I could have gone to the other side of the street, but I was pissed at this guy for humiliating me just as much as I was scared of him, so I wanted to prove that he couldn't get a reaction out of me. I slowly approached him, watching his every move. That's when he started putting up invisible walls again, but not a box this time, more like a barrier. He pretended to block off the sidewalk, even going over the sides to the curb and into the person's yard he was standing in front of. It took everything I had to not stop or turn around when I got up to him. All I wanted to do was casually walk right through his mime wall, and that's exactly what I did. Only I didn't expect what would happen when I crossed through it. The mime screamed and almost bit my head off. I sprinted away as fast as I could. He started chasing me, almost grabbing me at an arm's length. I kept running and running until I reached the point that I thought I was going to collapse. But then I kept going. Finally, I was able to round a corner with enough distance to jump into a bush and hide behind it. The mime ran right past me and kept going, giving me a moment to breathe. I gave it a few seconds. Then I jumped out of the bush and ran the other way, going back toward downtown. I wanted people around just in case that freak found me again, and I didn't want him to know where I lived. I eventually found safety inside a convenience store where I called my dad. He came to pick me up a few minutes later. We called the police, and I told them everything that happened, but there wasn't enough to go on for them to really do anything about it. I didn't know what he actually looked like or anything else about him. I thankfully haven't seen him since, but not knowing kills me. He could be anywhere. He could find me at any moment. Every time I see a mime now, I have an anxiety attack. There's always a split-second reaction I have where I think it's him, before I realize it's just a normal mime only, but I can never really know. I live in the US, but I travel a lot for work. When I'm visiting home for the holidays, I stay at the Trump Tower. The hotel is very busy at that time of year, so I always book my room months in advance. The place was always packed as hell. There were always people packed in the lobby, crowding the restaurant to get a table, and lining up in the driveway to get the valet to park their car. I always get a cab or an Uber, so the valet line is never an issue for me. Over the years, I've seen just about every type of nice car in that line, but recently, I've been seeing one type of car that sticks out like a sore thumb. Those stupid pieces of shit Cybertrucks. I've got nothing against Elon Musk. It's gotten to the point in the last few years that I see one of them in line almost every time I go in or out of Trump Towers. I even started to recognize one particular Cybertruck because of the driver inside it. It was this large, creepy looking guy. I remember seeing him often, and he would always give me this creepy ass stare through his window. The guy looked like he was in the military, with a high and tight haircut and a bulky jaw. On that first trip I saw him, I went in and out of the building maybe a dozen times for one reason or another, and I feel like I saw him every other time. It was almost like he was just going in and out, driving around in circles just to get back in line for the valet. It honestly made me a bit paranoid, like he was surveilling me, even though I would have no logical reason to be watched. Still, I took a mental picture of his license plate, then I wrote it down once inside so I could recognize it. Once I had that information, I was able to confirm without looking inside the vehicle that it was the same Cybertruck waiting in line every single time. But it wasn't just one trip that I saw this guy. It happened the next year, and the next year after that. When I stayed at Trump Towers through these last holidays, I saw him every single time I entered or left the building. On the night of New Year's Eve, I left to be with my family. On the way back in, for once, there wasn't anybody in line for the valet. I figured everyone was still out celebrating, so this time, I cut across the driveway instead of sticking to the sidewalk. And then all of a sudden, I saw a Cybertruck barreling toward me. Ah! I thought it was going to hit me, but it came screeching to a halt just inches away from me. I was terrified at first, but when I realized I was still alive, all the fear turned into anger. I could barely see through the windshield, but I knew it was the same guy that always looped through the valet. So I went off on him and started screaming at him and kicking the truck.
You idiot, you could have killed me! Say goodbye to your stupid Cybertruck! Goddamn thing never should have been made in the first place! What are you, driving on autopilot? Are you watching the hub and playing with yourself or something? Why don't you pay attention to where you're going instead of letting this dumbass thing run people over, dipshit?
When I'd let off all my steam, I realized the guy was just staring at me. He hadn't reacted at all. He had the same expression as he always did. Nothing but empty, directionless rage. He was starting to creep me out, so before the interaction went any further, I dropped it and went inside. From there, I called it a night and prepared to fly home the following morning. Except, when I got down to the lobby, I looked through the glass and saw the Cybertruck at the front of the valet line. I walked over to check the license plate, and it was the same guy as always. So I stayed inside since my ride wasn't there yet, just in case this guy was still angry about the previous night. I took a seat near the exit and waited, only for the unthinkable to happen seconds later. The Cybertruck exploded, sending me flying across the lobby floor. I was dazed, my ears were bleeding, and for a second, I had no idea where I was or what had just happened. But as I looked around, it all came back. It was pure chaos in there. Eventually, cops and paramedics arrived, and I got checked at the hospital. Nothing else had happened. It was just the one explosion. But before it was even confirmed, I knew who was responsible. It was the same guy I kept seeing outside the building. Apparently, it was this ex-military guy who went psycho after years of PTSD. He planted bombs in his car and doused it with fuel for even more destruction. They say he used ChatGPT to help him figure out how to go through with it. Thankfully, everyone but him survived his attack. I just think I'll never be able to look at a Cybertruck and feel safe ever again. This story was inspired by a disturbing incident regarding a decorated soldier who was behind a Tesla Cybertruck bombing outside the Trump International Hotel in Las Vegas. It was reported that the suspect allegedly used the artificial intelligence platform ChatGPT to plan the attack, which happened on New Year's Day. U.S. Army Special Forces Master Sergeant Matthew Livelsberger looked into the amount of explosives he would need, where to buy fireworks, and how to buy a phone without providing identifying information. Police say that this may be the very first incident on US soil where ChatGPT is utilized to help an individual build a particular device. Officials are still working to determine what exactly detonated the explosion, but said it could have been the muzzle flash from the firearm Livelsberger used. A review of a note on Livelsberger's phone showed that Livelsberger believed that people were following him, which included details on Livelsberger's activities leading up to the bombing, including his purchase of firearms and picking up the Cybertruck as a rental. Investigators in the Army found that Livelsberger likely had post-traumatic stress disorder, along with family issues and personal grievances that may have contributed to his actions. Officials say Livelsberger did not have any criminal history, nor did he have any animosity toward President Trump.